The topic for this morning is going to be gaslighting. This is the newest buzzword that is always in the news these days.
What does gaslighting mean, John?
It's a very good question. Lots of people talk about it, but it's very elusive to define. In fact, it's an example of what it actually is. It's, it's really creating a fog. It's a psychological manipulation, sowing the seeds of doubt, so that you cause the individual to question their own memory, their own perception, and even their own judgment. So really it's a combination of using various elements such as denial, misdirection, and misinformation in order to reinforce this fog and to put the person into a kind of whirlpool. An example of this is when abusers do this to their victims all the time, particularly with children.
Well, how would you describe this in general?
I think the key metaphor here is creating fog, that you find yourself enveloped by a set of lies. They're so numerous and so tightly packed together that you just become completely disoriented. And so when somebody asks you to pick out one lie or the other, it's extremely difficult.
Is this a kind of hypnosis?
Actually, very much so. An example of this we can find in conversational hypnosis, which is a specific technique of stringing a series of non sequiturs, and that is statements that appear to lead to the next but are not actually truly logically connected, in a smooth and continuous speech with a very even and smooth and soothing cadence, similar to what I'm using right now. And it's a technique that can be learned and perfected. But the one thing is, because it is a technique, it's something that requires a high degree of concentration and is very, very difficult to maintain for anything more than a few minutes, unless it is literally second nature. It's the way you roll. That then is what we're dealing with. People who by nature communicate this way.
Well, would you say that it is a form of deflection, or is it something more than that?
Actually, that's a good question, lovely lady. It's often sold as deflection, but it's actually far worse. It's actually one of the most, it's almost like itself the footprint of evil. It's pernicious lying. It's not merely defensive, it's malicious. And it's directed at provoking and directing hatred. And so it's used by cults, it's used by political movements, it's used ultimately by people who are trying to stir up other people to do wrong, in fact. And, an example of it would be Adolf Hitler. It's a prime example we have. And so he singled out the Jews. Always it's a singling out of the outsider. Now it's the Mexicans at the border. And the interesting thing is that all of these people who use it continuously, seem to be playing from the same playbook. And it's as if these people all went to a kind of finishing school for sociopaths. And so I ask myself, if there was such a school, where would it be? And who would be the instructors?
This seems to be something associated with the right wing. For example, you see this on Fox News.
Yes, absolutely. It would be the most prevalent there. However, it's certainly not exclusive to the right. But all its key politicians, the pundits, the theoreticians, all the people who the talking heads, are reading from the same playbook once again. An example is not even pretending to answer the question, speaking quickly and forcibly and rapidly shifting from topic to topic, so you're continuously disorienting the person. As they follow one topic, you've already shifted to the next. It's like being subjected to a kind of verbal blitzkrieg in which you're completely overwhelmed by this tsunami of lies.
I think it would be helpful if you could give us some examples, John.
Well, actually, there's tons of examples, because we are just surrounded by it. But an example of it would be, for instance, Mike Pence, when he was talking about the White House's response to the coronavirus. And it was, just extraordinary to listen to him pick out an isolated measure such as the travel ban and act as if this was some kind of amazing act of brilliance on our part in saving so many, when all it was in fact a very weak measure that really didn't have any result at all. Another example of this would be Meadows, when he's talking about the mail-in balloting. This is a system that's existed for the longest time. Certain states actually use it almost predominantly. All of a sudden, it's being called into question. And then he says, well, how can you prove that it won't be a problem? And of course, there is no way to prove such a thing. And a very similar, this has actually been used for a long, long time. I mean, for instance, this playbook was used by the neocons to justify the arms race during the Reagan era, when there was no evidence whatsoever of a Russian build-up in any form, but then the very fact that they couldn't verify it, absolutely, that the Russians had or didn't have, was then used as a basis to justify the fact that they had to increase their own protection. It was an absolutely circular reasoning, but very effective.
Well, would you say this is restricted to only those in the public arena?
No, certainly this is not just the public. We actually experience this in every aspect of our lives. In fact, you could actually say that our lives today are gaslit. It is the lens through which we are seeing the world. It's so pervasive that, in a sense, we don't even know that it exists anymore.
So, does this relate to the current coronavirus pandemic?
Actually, most certainly it does. Because on the one hand, we have Trump, who's telling us just nonsense, just repeating the same thing over and over again, that it'll disappear by magic. So anybody with a modicum of intelligence knows this is nonsense. But then on the other side, we have Fauci contradicting this. And just because Fauci is contradicting somebody who is obviously lying doesn't mean that he is actually telling the truth. And in a sense, this is the trick, the magician's trick of misdirection. Because just because one side is false doesn't mean that the other side isn't false as well. And so they can actually be selling us lies from both sides, which is the ultimate form of gaslighting. Thank you.